Happy Wednesday, mathematicians. Today for your math workshop, you're going to need your math notebook, your Envisions workbook. That's the thin workbook that has black and white pages. You're going to be pulling out page 59 and 60. At the top, it should say topic 5-2, mental math estimate quotients. Then you need your blue math resource folder located in your anchor binder. Today, go ahead and open it up. On the left side, you're going to take out the teach pages. Make sure that you remember that sometimes teach pages might be out of order, so just listen and look for the correct pages. The two pages that you're going to need today, the first one is titled at the top, Division Estimate Quotients. And then the second one is your practice page that starts at the top, Example, Estimate each quotient, and the first problem is 2,782 divided by 7. Make sure you have the correct two pages out, then clip everything back together. Put that back in your anchor binder inside of your basket. Then go ahead back to your notebook. We're going to go ahead and insert our information. So before you did today's lesson, you should be reviewing your completed classwork from yesterday. Yesterday, we began our next unit on division, and we focused on how to find quotients using our basic facts and our zeros trick. So yesterday, you completed the workbook page for topic 5-1. You should have submitted a copy of the front and the back, as well as your two completed notebook pages. Remember, when I ask you in the video to complete a section of the notebook, you should not take the picture to submit unless it's finished. Some of you need to make sure that you go back to yesterday's assignment and fix the work so you can get all of your points. Today we're going to go ahead and turn the page. On the left, we're going to label it number 64, and on the right, number 65. Then turn back to your table of contents. And we're going to record number 64. And today's lesson is division, estimate quotients. And then put today's date, which is 10-14-20. Then turn back to today's pages that we just recorded. And you're going to be gluing in the teach page with the title on the left, the example practice reflection on the right. So use your glue stick. Make the frame, crisscross, and smooth it down. Do the same thing with the right side. And smooth it down. Once you're done gluing in your two pages, then go ahead and highlight the top at the title or our focus for today's lesson. So today we're going to be learning how to estimate a quotient using our understanding of multiples of a number. So when we think of quotients, we have to remember that's a vocabulary word that we introduced yesterday. Quotients means the answer. And when we talk about estimating, we can use either rounded numbers or compatible numbers, which we'll be talking about in further detail today. So looking at the first box, this is our first strategy of how to estimate. So we're going to put a number 1 for the first way to solve. So the first way to solve estimating is by using rounding. And rounding is a process that determines which multiple of 10, 100, 1,000, and so on a number is closest to. So I'm going to highlight number is closest to. And we should remember that when we talk about estimating, we're not finding an exact, we're finding something that is very close to the correct answer. So we're going to look at the first practice. It says to round, so I'm going to box that important word. It tells me exactly which strategy it wants me to use. So round each number to the nearest 1,000. And it also is giving me the exact place value to look closely at. This is where you're going to sing your song for rounding as a reminder of the steps. So when we find our place, that's what place value they're referring to. So finding the place means I'm underlining. Find my place, look next door, 5 or more, raise the score, 4 or less, let it rest. So it's 5 or more, so that means it's going to raise the score of the number that's underlined. So when it raises a score, it moves it up by adding 1 to the value, so that changes to a 6. And then the rest of the song lyric says, look to the right, zeros in sight. So we have 1, 2, 3 place values that change into zeros. So we place 1, 2, 3 zeros in the answer. Don't forget the comma to show the correct value. So our rounded number to the nearest 1,000 is the value of 6,000. Doing the same thing again with the second problem. Once again, we're still rounding to the nearest 1,000. So we find our place, look next door, 5 or more, raise the score, 4 or less, let it rest. So it's 4 or less, meaning the underlying digit is going to rest. When it rests, it means it doesn't change. So I rewrite the exact same number that is underlined, and then we follow the rest of the lyrics. Look to the right, zeros in sight. We have 1, 2, 3 place values that turn to zeros. And then I place my comma to show the correct value. So we just did a quick practice of how we used our rounding song to round to a specified place value. So now the next one says to round again, but this time to the nearest 100. So when I find my place, I need to make sure that I know the place value. So we look at the hundreds place, find the place, look next door, 5 or more, raise the score, 4 or less, let it rest. So it's 4 or less, meaning it's going to let the 5 rest, but we have to remember anything to the left of the underline stays the same. So the 3 in the 1,000 stays the same. We let the 5 rest, which means it doesn't change. Look to the right, zeros in sight. So we have 1, 2 place values that change to zeros. Place the comma to be the rounded number of 3,500. The next one is the number 6,284. So once again, rounding to the nearest 100. So find the place, look next door, 5 or more, raise the score, 4 or less to let it rest. So it's 5 or more, so it's going to raise the score of the 2 to be a 3. So we write the 3, but we also have to remember anything to the left of the place value we were looking at stays the same. Then starting at the arrow, we have look to the right, zeros in sight. So we have 2 place values, meaning 2 zeros. Put the comma, so the rounded number is 6,300. So we have 2 different types of problems we just practiced with our rounding song. Remember, you have to go through the lyrics to know that you're covering all of the steps to find the correct rounded number. The second strategy we were taught how to estimate a number is by looking for compatible numbers, not just rounded numbers, but compatible. So compatible numbers are numbers that are easy to compute mentally. So we're going to highlight that section. Easy to compute mentally, meaning that you can solve them in your head without a lot of trouble. Compatible numbers can be used to estimate quotients. Use compatible numbers to estimate 58 divided by 8. So when we use compatible numbers, we're looking to create a dividend that we can then break into equal groups. So in order to find a correct compatible number, we're always going to look at our divisor. So we're going to look at, and we're going to write, look at divisor and list multiples of that number. And when we list the multiples, that's basically writing the numbers that are in that particular multiplication song. So when we list the multiples of 8, we can then figure out what is a compatible number that 8 could be divided into. So when I look at this, I can say, well, if I'm listing my multiples of 8, I always start by writing the number 8. Then I list everything in its song. So we have 8, 16, 24, 32, 40, 48, 56, 64. And I could keep listing all of the multiples that are in the 8th song. I just ran out of room. When we then look back at what they're telling us to do with the compatible numbers, it says think of a multiplication fact with 8 as a factor that has a product that is close to 58. So when we look at our multiples list, we're trying to find the number that is closest to 58. So we're going to record, find the number in the multiples list that is close. So they're telling us to find what's close to 58. Well, we need to make sure we remember where to look to find what's close. So looking back up into our multiples list, we're trying to find the number that's closest to 58. So when we scan through the multiples, we have the number 48, 56, 64. When we're ready to find the closest one, we can then lasso it by just indicating that we found the product that's closest to the original. So we're trying to find the number that we could then substitute in place of this dividend. So we're going to just show some of the multiples that would get us close. So if we said 8 times 6, well, that gets us to the product of 48, which we have listed. 8 times 7, which we've listed next. And then 8 times 8, which is 64. We indicated that the closest product or the closest number in the 8's multiple list is the number 56. So I'm going to go ahead and lasso that particular problem. So when we fill it in, we're going to then indicate that 56 is close to 58. So then we look at the remaining part of this fact family equation. So divide blank by 8. So we're going to replace the 58 with the 56. So dividing 56 by 8. And then we can rewrite it with just the equation 56 divided by 8. Looking at that fact family problem, the missing number is 7 because we know, we can write because 7 times 8 equals 56. Or you could have written 8 times 7 is 56. So 58 divided by 8, the word that is important is the word about, meaning that it is an estimate. So we're going to write estimate is 7. So we're changing the dividend to become a number that works in the multiples list of the divisor to find out an approximate estimate for the answer. So when we go down to the problems, it says to estimate. So we remember that estimating is exactly the strategy we're using today, but we have 2 different ways that we could solve. We have the problem 3,742 divided by 8 by rounding the dividend. So it's specifically telling me what I need to do. So for this one, I'm going to take my number to the side, 3,742. And it says round 3,742 to the nearest thousand. So it tells me the place value to round to. So I find my place, look next door, 5 or more, raise the score. So this is 5 or more, so it's going to raise the score of the 3 to become a 4. Look to the right, zeros in sight. So I have 1, 2, 3 place values that change to zeros. So I go ahead and record them. Place the comma to show the rounded number. We can then write it in the blank. So then it says to use the rounded dividend. So this is my rounded dividend. So I record it in the dividends position. That's always comes first. So how much I have divided by 8 equals. So now we're using our basic fact and our zeros trick. So looking at the dividend, we have to remember that we're trying to eliminate zeros to be left with the basic fact. Well, I should be able to spot right away that if I took all of those zeros away, I would not be able to divide 4 divided by 8. That wouldn't work. So I need to make sure that I leave it to be a 40 to divide by 8. So that means I'm only taking 2 zeros to the zeros trick. 40 divided by 8 is the same thing as saying 8 times what missing number gives me the product of 40. When we determine what's missing by using our multiplication songs, we then know the number that gets placed in the quotient to be a 500. So when we look at the original problem, 3,742 divided by 8, we need to remember when it says about, we're going to write the number 500 because that's the estimate. Moving down to the next one, it says to use compatible numbers to estimate the number 267 divided by 3. So this time I'm going to use compatible numbers to do the estimating. So the problem right above said to use rounding. This time it says to use compatible. Anytime it says to use compatible, I always have to look at my divisor. So look at divisor and list multiples. So I'm going to bring that over to the side because I have more workspace. So I'm listing the multiples of the number 3. So then we can write 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21, 24, 27, 30, and then we could keep going. It says what number is close to 267 and is easy to divide by 3. So I need to also think of how could I use my zeros trick to add zeros to my multiples, to add zeros to multiples. So I could either sit there and take a couple minutes to list all the multiples, getting as close to the number 268 or 267 as possible, or I could go ahead and create the multiples list for the number 30. So we could say, we could skip up to 30 would be right here. So we're just moving it down. And then we're going to skip some numbers. So we're going to then put 60, 90, 120, 150, 180, 210, 240, 270. So we're just using our knowledge that we can add zeros to the end of our original multiples list to find larger values. So when we look back at our list now that we've created, we need to find the number that's closest to 267. So when I look below, I can see I have 210, 240, 270. So right away I can spot the number that would be the closest to the original that I'm going to then use instead. So it says use multiples of 10 that are close to 267. Is 260 easily divided by 3? Think 26 divided by 3. That wouldn't work because there is no number to say 3 times what equals 26. Because if you sang your 3 song, 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21, 24, and 30, 27, you would not find any number. So we can say that does not work. Since the quotient has a remainder, that's not compatible. So then we moved up to 270. 270 is going to easily be divided by 3 because we can use the zeros trick. So when we think of the basic fact that's left, 27 divided by 3, we know that the missing number to that equation is the number 9. So we could then go ahead and place 270 as a compatible number for the dividend divided by the original divisor to say take the 0, place it in my quotient. 27 divided by 3 once again is 9 to have the estimated answer of 90, which we can rewrite again. Looking at the right side, we're going to do the same type of work. It says to estimate each quotient. So on the first problem we're going to do is we're going to use rounding first. So when we look at rounding, we're going to round this time to the nearest hundreds place. So when we look at hundreds place, we look next door 5 or more, raise the score. 4 or less, let it rest. So that means that the 7 is raising the score to change up to an 8. Anything to the left stays the same. Look to the right, zeros in sight. We have 1, 2 place values that change to zeros. So our rounded number is 2,800. We bring down the remaining part of the problem. And then we can use our zeros trick to say 2 zeros get placed in the answer. 28 divided by 7. If you think of in reverse fact family, 7 times what missing number is 28. You should remember that 4 is the missing factor. So that tells me that the answer should be a 4 in front of the zeros to make the answer of 400. The next problem, it says to use compatible numbers to estimate each quotient. So this time we're looking at our multiples list to help us find compatible. So 375 divided by 6 means that we're listing multiples of 6. When I spot that the original dividend is a large number, I'm going to write my multiples using that zeros technique or the zeros trick onto it. So if we list, we're going to say 60, and then the next one would be 120 because it would be 12, but we would have the 0 put on. Then we would have had 18, add the 0 to be 180. The next one would be 24, add the 0 to be 240. The next would be 30 with an added 0 to be 300. The next is 36 with the added 0 to be 360. And the last one that we're going to list because the room is 42, add the 0 to be 420. So when we look at the original dividend, we're finding the product or the number listed that is close to 375. So when we're looking at the numbers available, 300 is kind of close, but we could get even closer when we see 360. So 360 is going to be our compatible number we're going to replace this number with. So then we're going to rewrite it as 360 divided by the original divisor of 6 and use our basic fact and zeros trick. So 0 gets moved to the answer. We're left with 36 divided by 6, gives us 60 as the answer, and then we can write our answer in the original equation. Looking at the next one, we're going to do the same 2 techniques. So the first one is going to be rounding, the second one's going to be compatible numbers. So when we look at this first one, we're going to once again round to the nearest hundreds place. Looking next door, 5 or more is going to raise the score of the 5. So when we raise the score, it moves up by 1. Anything to the left of that number stays the same. Look to the right, zeros in sight. We have 1, 2 place values that then change to zeros. So the rounded number is 3,600. We bring down the remaining part of the problem. Now we can use our zeros trick to finish solving. So we have 1, 2 zeros that get moved to the answer. 36 divided by 6 leaves us with a 6 to place in front to show that the quotient is 600. The next problem, we're using compatible numbers, so that means that we're looking at the number 3 and writing our multiples. But remember, when we list our multiples, we can start with our regular multiples of our song, or you can use the multiples with the 0 added on trick. So we're going to add the zeros added on, so we're going to start with the multiple of 3, add the 0. The next multiple after 3 is 6, add the 0. After 6, the next multiple is 9, add the 0. Then we can have 12, add the 0. We can see that we're not getting close to that original dividend of 606, so we can add another 0. So we can add to the next one to say, okay, well, if we started with the multiple of 3, this time let's add 2 zeros to be a 300. Then when we had the next multiple of 6, if we add the 2 zeros, we would have had the multiple of 600. Then our next one would be 9. Add the 2 zeros, would be 900. Next multiple is 12. Add the 2 zeros to be 1,200. Now we have a number that we could substitute it because we have a compatible number of 600 that we could replace it with. So we're going to use the number 600, then replace the 606. So we're going to say 600 now divided by the original divisor. And we can use the zeros trick to complete our problem solving. So 1, 2 zeros, place them in the answer. 6 divided by 3 would give us the answer of 2 to place in front. And then we say that the quotient is 200. The key to understanding compatible numbers is using your multiplication songs, but with the adding a zero trick to the end of each of the multiples. That way you're saving yourself time and you're not creating a list that takes up your entire page if the original dividend that you're trying to get close to is multiple digits. The last two problems that you have today are word problems. The first one is the STEM, the International Space Station, takes 644 minutes. So we're gonna lasso the number with the label to orbit Earth 7 times. So once again, lasso that amount. About, that's the key word there for estimating how long does each orbit take. So if our original problem would have been the 644 minutes divided by how many minutes are in each of those times around, we're being asked to use estimation. So with estimation, we're going to end up using the compatible method this time. So we're going to list the multiples of 7. So once again, we have to be able to spot that if we're listing the multiples of 7 and our original dividend we're trying to get close to is a multi-digit number, we might want to use the trick of adding a 0 to the multiples. So instead of saying 7, 14, 21, we're going to start with 7, add the trick of adding a 0 to the end. Then we would have said 14, add the trick of the 0 in the end. And then you keep going. So then the next number is 21, add the 0. Then we have the number 28, add the 0. Then we would have the number 35, add the 0. The next one would be 42, add the 0. Mrs. Ling's gonna go ahead down here. After 42, we would have had 49, add the 0. We would then go to 56, add the 0. The next multiple is 63, add the 0. And then the next one would be 70, add the 0. So because we use the trick of multiples with the adding a 0 to the end of the multiple, we're able to find a number that's going to be close to 644. When scanning through the multiples, the closest number would have been 630. So then I can rewrite my problem to say 630 is the compatible dividend we're going to use, dividing it by the original divisor of 7, to then say 63 or 630 divided by 7, zeros trick, place it in the quotient. 63 divided by 7 should give me the number of 9 to have the answer of 90. So I can then say the estimated quotient is 90, but we have to remember we have to label it. It's how long, so 90 minutes. And that is our final answer for that one. You're gonna do the same type of work for the next problem. It says, Raymond's sister wants to buy a car that costs $7,993. She earns $9 for every hour. That's gonna be important. She works about, so we're using estimation or compatible numbers. How many hours must Raymond's sister work to earn enough money to buy the car? So we have to set up our problem originally. So 7,993 divided by $9 for every hour, and we're trying to determine what is that amount. So we're going to then use our trick to say we're listing the multiples of the divisor. But when we look at this number, we have to remember we're going to add some zeros because otherwise we're going to need maybe 2 pieces of paper to find the multiples. So we're going to add 2 zeros to be the trick. So we're going to start with a multiple of 9. The next one after 9 would have been 18. So we write 18, add the 2 zeros. After 18 would have been 27, add the 2 zeros. After 27, we would have said 36, add the 2 zeros. Then we would have been to 45, add the 2 zeros. Once again, Mrs. Ling has to move herself down. So we said 54 is the next multiple, add the 2 zeros. Then 63, add the 2 zeros. Then it's 72, add the 2 zeros. 81, add the 2 zeros. So now I can spot right away that the number that I'm trying to get close to, 7,993, I have a number that's going to be close to it, because if we look, there's not that much difference. So I'm going to replace the dividend with the number 8,100. So we're going to write 8,100 divided by the original divisor of 9, and we can use the zeros trick. So 2 zeros, place them in the answer. 81 divided by 9 would give me 9, which then tells me that the estimated quotient is 900, but we have to make sure we label it so it's 900 hours as our final answer. Today you are going to be asked to write your reflection paragraph. Remember, that is at least 3 complete sentences describing the steps that you need to take to solve a problem using estimation. Make sure that you complete your reflection before you take your picture of your work. Then you're going to complete your classwork, which we said was in your Envisions workbook. That was on page 59 and 60. You're completing all even numbers. Because there is a small little workspace, you might need to use a separate piece of paper, but I expect you to show me all your work. And when I say show me all your work, we can see that the problems we did together, they take up some space. I should be able to determine if you're using rounding or compatible numbers, because compatible numbers, I should see multiple list. And then for rounding, I should see you underlining, pointing to the next door to show how you're getting to your estimated or rounded dividend. You're going to do the numbers on the front as well as the back. Make sure show your work for all. In the end, you should have 4 pictures to submit to me for today's lesson.